like I say, already super talented, and they formed this all-female bomber squadron called the Night Witches that fought during World War II. And so this RPG, it only takes place over a couple of evenings, both fictionally and in real life, but it's super, super evocative because you're experiencing this slice of history that very few people know about, and you're experiencing it from, let's be frank, a side of history that you don't necessarily think about too much.
Absolutely.
The Red Army.
Yeah, that is very interesting.
Not for everybody, again, but those are the sorts of games that I like. Very, very specific and very, very ephemeral, I guess.
Yeah. Since we played, have you done anything else with Dogs in the Vineyard?
I tried to run it for a couple of people who were atheists, and they couldn't stop. So let me cover what Dogs in the Vineyard is. It is a brilliant little game about a Wild West that never was, because this Wild West in the fiction has been settled by Mormons with the serial numbers filed off. So everybody, all of the characters in the party have not only like the best guns in the West, but also spiritual abilities more akin to Jedi from Star Wars than anybody else. But they're also Mormons. They believe in polygamy. They believe that their specific set of scripture is Holy Writ. And trying to run it for people who actively disdain religion of all types is very difficult, and they could not handle that game at all, and they just gave up.
That's too bad, because that was a really interesting experience for me as somebody who was sort of more who did have a greater affinity for D&D and definitely more of the combat based RPG stuff, and that certainly took me in directions that were interesting and new in terms of role playing, because when your combat when it's almost when having like a tense conversation in that game is almost an equivalent experience to combat, then that's a really interesting gaming experience.
Yeah, I agree. When a tense conversation can turn into a gunfight on a dime, but they both use the same exact mechanics in the game, it's a pretty fascinating experience. I agree.
Yep. Yeah, that is cool. Yeah. So Star Trek and role playing is. Sorry, go ahead.
So just to wrap that up real quick, I still run a lot of role playing games at local conventions and game stores once in a while. One of my favorite things to do is to meet new people through the hobby, and also to, I'll just be honest, to proselytize the wisdom of story games and try to get some old D&D grognards to try something new. So that's kind of what I do. I enjoy going to Origins convention in Columbus, Ohio every year.
Yeah, Origins has been a fun experience. I've been there a couple of times, and actually one of the once when I went with our friend Mark, I was dismayed that I had to pay for the admission of my then I think he was barely 2.5-year-old child, because he can walk, and that's their criteria for somebody who has to pay admission. And
yeah, that's a bummer.
And I wish that I had thought a little bit more quickly on my feet. And I said to Mark later, I was like, man, there's the family admission charge that is less than this. And for the sake of gaming the system, it would have been a hoot for us to pretend to have been together to get the cheaper admission.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but those big conventions nickel and dime you, and if you don't know what you're doing, it's almost not worth going.
Yeah. But at that convention, I actually had a chance to meet Patrick Rothfuss, the author of the Kingkiller Chronicle. So that was really cool.
That's awesome. I was just going to say that the nice thing about conventions is that your heroes are generally pretty accessible. That's super cool.
Yeah. So Star Trek and RPG is mainly where you're at in terms of geek culture, then.
Yep.
Yeah. All right.
And I entered into H.P. Lovecraft through gaming, and H.P. Lovecraft's mythos would not have the cultural traction that it does without the presence of Call of Cthulhu, the role-playing game. I just wanted to say that.
Interesting. Okay. Okay, because Call of Cthulhu has I've gotten the impression about that game is that it's pretty I don't know if underground is the right word, but definitely on the fringe of RPG gaming. Or am I totally wrong about that?
You're not totally wrong, but I would direct anyone who's curious about its demographic representation to just open up a program book from any gaming convention, and what you will see is about 60 to 80% Dungeons and Dragons games being run,
Mm-hmm.
and then you will see about, like, say there's 75% Dungeons and Dragons being run, you will then see about 15 to 20% of Call of Cthulhu and Shadowrun. Those are the two big contenders. And I don't want to say contenders because they will never overtake D&D, but they are the ones that people gravitate towards for a slightly different experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting.
And at various times, Vampire the Masquerade, the big goth game from the 90s, has also approached in popularity. And it occupies a similar space a lot. When I first got into Call of Cthulhu, I also bought the Vampire books, which were promptly thrown away by a friend's father when I spent the night one night.
Oh, no, that's
That's
terrible.
another story entirely.
Yeah.
Well, I should have shown him a little more respect before taking them over. But anyway, Vampire comes and goes. Call of Cthulhu has been more of a consistent presence in the RPG industry. Mm-hmm. And no, I would not call it underground because I think they make a decent living doing it. Whereas the smaller story games that are on my shelf, like, these are more like labors of love.
Sure,
I would say.
Sure. So I'm a little bit interested. How has the game system of Call of Cthulhu evolved over its life? If we're in 7th edition now, what's the most striking difference between the way the game plays now versus the way the game played in days gone by?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it hasn't changed nearly enough for my taste, but I think I've already covered some of my issues with this system. I am pleased. I did play in a 7th edition game recently, and I am pleased that they have unified the dice mechanics. And for your listeners, the only way to talk about this is to get a little bit deep into RPG talk.
Go for it.
They have finally unified the dice mechanics to be all percentile based.
Okay.
Whereas in editions 1 through 6, you had to roll 3d6 for your stats. Mm-hmm. Like in Dungeons and Dragons, and then you had a skill system, which D&D had, to my knowledge, still doesn't have, and the skill system was always percentile based, and you had at least 40 or 50 skills to pick from.
Well, no, D&D definitely has D&D definitely has skills, but of course in D&D, or at least in 3 and 3.5, it's all rolled on a D20 anyway.
Okay, I apologize. Like I said, you're the expert here.
Yeah.
So percentile system goes from a scale of basically 1 to 100 or 1 to 98 or something like that. So 1 to 100, and then they finally made that apply to all abilities on the character sheet, which makes it look and play a lot cleaner, so you don't have to be constantly fiddling with which dice to pick up. And like D&D 5th edition most recently, Call of Cthulhu 7th edition has finally embraced a few innovations from the story game scene, which most notably, I would say, a certain openness to player input. Previous editions of both games, as I understand it, are mostly reliant on the game master preparing a story,
right,
and maybe letting the players roll some dice. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
Which is critical. That's too critical of me to say. But in the current editions, there's a lot more open-ended advice about allowing players to have certain freedoms when it comes to suggesting things about the world that previous editions just didn't get into. So that's about it. It plays a little more loose. It plays a little more loosey-goosey. Mystery RPGs are a funny animal, a particular beast, because in truth, the game master does hold all the cards. The game master holds the facts of the case.
Right.
There's an investigation that happens, and they hold everything that truly happened is a secret, and the players have to discover it. So some people don't like them because there's not a lot of room for player input. The players can't just say, "Well, I think it was the monster at the desk with the candlestick."
Yep.
Well, the game master already knows that it wasn't those things. So sorry, not that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Well, now for something completely different.
Sure.
I would love to talk to you about Wonder Woman.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Okay. Tell me, first of all, I would like for you to tell me what you thought of the movie.
Okay, sure. Wonder Woman was the first geeky film that my wife and I decided was critically important for her to see first. And I think the reasons are probably self-evident, right? Most geeky interests have started with me. Like, I watched Babylon 5 long before her. I watched all of the Star Trek series before her. And she was just like, you know what? This film stars a woman, directed by a woman, is pretty much for women, and ostensibly contains a lot of feminist themes. So I'm going to go out with my girlfriends and see it. And I was like, sweet, that's awesome. And she did, and she loved it. And so that probably informs my experience too, because I'm really, really excited to see a broader representation in geek culture.
Yeah.
Any people of color or women that get to produce this material, I think is a blanket good thing. Whether or not that material is good is up to the individual consumer, and I think it's all subjective. But I was super excited this film existed. Mm-hmm. I was a little confused at the publicity for it, because the publicity seemed a little on the weak side. Like, a number of people I spoke with just had this opinion, like, oh, is Wonder Woman even coming out? Like, I didn't really know about it, but they certainly knew about Guardians of the Galaxy and Justice League and stuff. So that was weird. But yeah, I went to see it with her for her second time, and I was blown away. The first 20 minutes in, you're gonna have to help me out.
Themyscira.
Thank you. Were very, very moving. They were beautifully shot, beautifully acted, with Princess Buttercup from The Princess Bride, which was just the most amazing thing.
That was a surprise to me. I didn't and I think actually now that I think back about it, I think I had seen Robin Wright's name attached to the project, but I had completely forgotten about it by the time I got around to watching the movie, and so that was an interesting surprise to me.
Sure. And I knew that she was in it, but didn't know that she was, frankly, in that amazing shape to do so many of her own stunts, and be such a strong character in the film. Yeah. And I was super impressed with the world building, which also was one of my things that I enjoyed about Man of Steel. Oddly enough, I mentioned that because I guess we're talking about the DC universe. I liked the bits of Man of Steel that were on Krypton. They were super cool.
Oh man, the stuff from Man of Steel that was on Krypton was amazing. For me, that was absolutely the best part of the movie.
Absolutely, completely agreed. And once they got back to General Zod, I was like, yawn, nope, don't care. But yeah, I loved Wonder Woman. I thought they did her character justice. The actress did an amazing job. Gal Gadot, I will see anything with Gal Gadot in it at this point. I think Chris Pine as the supporting love interest, who was a little bit physically objectified, and my wife and I appreciated that. Like, let's get the man half naked and talk about his sexual, stuff rather than just doing it to the women all the time. Sure, let's do it.
Yeah.
The only drawback I think in the whole film was probably just a drawback for most superhero films, which is a protracted 20-minute boss fight at the end. That to me is maybe a trope that we could not have to have in every superhero film, but that's just me.
So, and there's a lot of what you're saying that I totally agree with in terms of it being a good thing that there's a film with a strong female lead that's directed by a woman. That's great. I'm behind that, and I think I've pretty recently become more sympathetic and understanding of the idea of representation in genre fiction, especially. But I honestly, I did not love this movie. And I agree with you 100%. Themyscira was beautifully realized. All that stuff was really well done. And Gal Gadot is an amazing actress. I believed. See, I enjoyed her portrayal, her job in her acting job was one of the best things for me about the movie, because I was able to believe her more than I think honestly any other piece of this film.
Okay.
There was a lot of the effects heavy scenes that to me I thought it looked terrible. the way that it was the way that it was shot, and the way that she moved, especially